infinite complacency. People went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Well, Tim, I appreciate you getting in touch with me. Today we are going to be discussing, of course, one of my favorite subjects, that is Bigfoot, and you are in Skamania County, Washington. And for those of you that do not know, that is mainly southwest, kind of south central Washington, and it includes the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, half of Mount Adams, and most all of the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument. I personally, Tim, have been to Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, and it's stunning because it's like stepping into this lush, ancient rainforest. And once you go to a place like that versus, if you go to a forest in maybe parts of Utah, places like that, it's completely different. And when you go to a place like Gifford-Pinchot, it's easy to see where something very large and adept at such a place would easily be able to hide.
Oh, yeah. Even a person, if they wanted to hide and they knew what they were doing, they could definitely do that in the Gifford. The Gifford-Pinchot is actually right across the canyon from me, and then my property butts up against a state forest land.
Wow, so, no wonder, huh? I wonder what we're going to be talking about has been going down. Okay, this is exciting. So how long have you guys been in that area?
Just over 11 years. We moved in October of 2010, and the house had been vacant for about 4 years, and it was a distressed HUD repo, and it was just getting fixed when we moved in. It was, it was finally fixed up, and there's a little bit of a story behind behind the people who used to live there and some of the damage that was done to the house and, prior to us moving in. But it's on 15 acres, and I literally have one neighbor on the end of a dead-end forest road. And when I first saw the property, I was in love. I mean, the view off the back deck is just incredible. It looks up a river canyon, and I found out over the years that the previous occupant was a pretty bad drunk. I ran into a coworker who actually knew the guy that lived there before me, and he was quite the poacher. He would take shots at just about anything. I found beer can stashes all through the woods on the property over the years. And the landlord, as they were finishing up the repairs, we got to talk, and the house had suffered quite a bit of damage. There were bowling ball size holes through the walls. There was just huge holes in the floor where the floor joists had been broken down to the ground. It's a manufactured home. What I discovered from the neighbor was they left overnight, came back the next day, grabbed the rest of their stuff, and just abandoned the place to the bank. I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering if maybe he took a shot at one of these things and they came back and took care of the house for him, or what really happened. That's all just speculation, but it just what I heard about the damage to the property was pretty interesting. And when we moved in, it probably wasn't 2 weeks before we started getting slaps on the walls, and then the fingernails, it sounded like fingernails tapping on the glass at night. And this went on. I mean, it wasn't nightly, but it was enough to really get us curious. I mean, it's definitely bear country where we live, but it got to the point where I was keeping spotlights and handguns next to the doors because I was trying to see what was tapping on the windows and what was slapping the walls at night. And, every time it happened, I'd slide the back door open and look out. And the thing about the back door, the sliding back door, is we have an 8-foot deck. And then there's, a 4-foot hand railing at the edge. So if it were a bear tapping on that sliding glass door, there would have been no way that bear could have gotten away without me spotting it. Well, this had been going on for a while. We started noticing like the lawn furniture around the fire pit being like turned completely upside down overnight. Just strange things getting moved around. When the first summer we were there, we had, fires out back, and we'd play some music, and we'd hear these strange like whoops from one side of the canyon. Then you hear another one responding from the other side of the canyon. And these things were loud, whatever it was. I mean, we thought maybe it was rednecks, with big sound systems up on the logging roads, like trying to communicate with each other or something. I had no idea what was going on with that. But I guess I'll get into the first sighting I had. It was just over a year after we'd been living there. And there's a holler behind the house. And there was 3 packs of coyotes that would go off every night. And one of them would go off down across that holler. There's a boulder field on the far side of that holler that goes up to some sheer cliffs that are about 80 to 100 feet tall at the top of the hill. And I figured that the coyote den was somewhere in that boulder field. Well, it was a Sunday afternoon. It was actually October 16th of 2011. I'll never forget that day. I put my 45 on my hip and I walked out of the back door, made my way down across the holler, and then back up into that boulder field, which is on a pretty good incline, probably about a 45-degree incline. And these boulders are just, they're big. Some of them are the size of school buses. But I ended up finding the den, and I was looking around. I could see, okay, they're leaving bones here. They're pooping all over the place. And, I found where the hole was up underneath this one rock. Well, I was coming up out of the boulders, and I looked up the hill, and not 40 yards from me was this dude standing there. All I could see was from like his mid-chest up, and he's just staring at me. And being a hunter, you see something in the woods and you freeze, and I froze. And I'm staring at this guy, and the first thing that went through my head was, after who's this dude, was like, is this a Neanderthal or what is this? He was all gray. He had amber colored eyes. About 3 weeks later, I went up to where he was standing once I mustered up the courage to go up there. And that brush that he was standing behind was about 7.5 feet tall, 7 to 7.5 feet tall. So if I'm seeing him from mid-chest up, I'm thinking 9.5, 10 foot tall. But what really impressed me was just the width of his shoulders. He was as wide as a pickup truck, like the hood of a pickup truck. The hair on his head and on his shoulders, like I said, he was all gray, but it looked like it had been combed back. It wasn't like matted and nasty like I hear a lot of people talking. This guy looked like he had been groomed, and he was just standing there staring down at me. And I don't know how long we stared at each other. Of course, everybody says it feels like an eternity. Well, let me tell you, it does. And I wasn't freaked out at first. It was kind of like being in a car accident, like 10 minutes later, you realize, oh, wow, what just happened, But as I'm staring at him, at one point, I don't know if he smelled something or heard something, but he kind of slightly turned his head, and I could see an ear, just like a human ear. And at that point, I figured, okay, I'm done here. I don't think I should be here anymore. I had that pistol on my hip, and I never thought of drawing it because he just looked too dang human, even though he wasn't human. His skin was kind of almost the same color as his hair. And the eyes, those amber colored eyes, I still have dreams of those things. It's hard to explain those eyes, but they almost seemed backlit. It wasn't a sunny day, there was a really high overcast, but and you could see like just enough of the shimmer on his shoulders on his hair. I decided it was time to start walking. So to get back to the house, I had to go back into the tree line, follow the game trail down to the bottom of the holler or into the opening there, and then back up to the house. And I took a few steps and I looked back up to where he was, and he was gone. And I was like, okay, here we go. I started walking down the game trail, and he stayed above and behind me and was matching my footfalls. And at one point I stopped, I lit a smoke, I was listening, I was looking, I didn't hear anything. I was like, okay, I just got to go. I just got to get out of here. As soon as I stepped off that rock, I heard him sound like he was stepping off a rock, and he kept matching my footfalls. Now this is October, the leaves are starting to fall, and whatever he was walking through, I could not have walked through that at the pace I was on the trail. So, I mean, it was thick stuff that he was going through. It had to have been. By the time I got to off that game trail and to the bottom of the holler where it opened up, I had that pistol in my hand, and Shannon, I was shaking. I mean, I'm a Desert Storm veteran. I mean, I've, had some pretty harrowing things in my life, but I could not stop my hand from shaking. And I'm looking at that 45 thinking, what is this going to do to that guy, if anything? And I made my way back up to the house. I sat outside for a little while, just trying to process what the hell just happened. And, being a fifth generation Northwesterner, I'd heard all the stories, the campfire stories, the weird guy at work that believes in Bigfoot. And when I first saw that guy, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I mean, there was no misidentifying. I mean, I've killed bear on my property. I mean, I'm a hunter. There was just no misidentifying what this guy was. And as I was sitting there thinking, I didn't tell anybody for about 3 weeks. I just told the family, it's like, look, when we hear these things at night, these slaps on the side of the house, just ignore it. Just ignore it. We're not going outside. We're not looking anymore. Just ignore it. And that was pretty much the beginning of living at that place for the last 11 years. It was, oh man, my mouth's all dry now, but it was pretty frightening. Since then, there's been I've had a few other sightings. I've had a whole bunch of just like glimpses of something moving behind the trees, like a shadow disappearing into a shadow. But yeah, that was pretty much the start of the whole ordeal. I did call the BFRO, and I did, submit a report to them, which they never put up on their website, which I was, a couple of years later, I started getting calls from Animal Planet and all this stuff. And I think what those guys do is, I think they just sit on the good stories and not put them on their site because they want to use it on their TV show or something. But they wanted to come out and do this investigation. And after I told the local guy what had happened, he said, oh, well, it sounds like a classic habituation. And it's like, I don't want to be habituated with these things, I never did let them come out and do an investigation because I was thinking, look, these yahoos are going to come out here, beat on trees, yell and scream and holler all night long, and then they're going to leave, and we got to put up with whatever's left,
Right.
I didn't want any of that, so I never did give them my location or anything. But that's after that sighting. Man, I read, I watched, I got my hands on anything and everything I could find about this subject, and I tell you, it just gets weirder and weirder. There was a couple of year period where I just had to stop. I mean, it was just too much, I just had to stop. And then with the things that have happened, subsequently, it's like, I don't consider myself a researcher, and I don't go looking for them. I know these things are out there, and I'm pretty sure that we have a clan of them around here. It's just, from some of the other sightings I've had, the talking, I mean, the communication in the woods. I mean, the first time I heard them talking that's another thing that just freaked me right the hell out. This was a couple of years after the sighting, and we used to have this dog he was half wolf. We had to train him to not chase the wildlife. I mean, he was fearless, but he wasn't allowed in our master bedroom. I mean, that was one of the rules, is he can sleep out in the living room. Every so often I'd find him curled up in our master bedroom closet, just like shaking like a leaf. And I was like, man, what? We just couldn't figure out what his problem was. It wasn't often, but it was enough to where we noticed. And towards the end of his life, the last time I caught him doing that, I was like, man, I slipped on some shoes. I went out a back door. Like, it has to be something outside, you know? And I came around. The way the house is set up is the front of the house is where the parking's at. We have a parking area. And then there's a knoll that rises up across the parking area. About 30 yards from the house is the base of this knoll. And I'm sure you've lived in the Northwest. You know how brushy it can be. Well, I was coming around the back of the house, and I was getting towards the front corner, and I stopped, and I could hear people talking, except it didn't really sound like people. It was really deep and guttural. I described it as sounding like bad Japanese. I mean, it was just like, but there was at least two of them going back and forth. And when I heard that, I stopped and I listened for a second, and I snuck back into the house. I crawled under my covers, and I felt like a frightened little 5-year-old boy. I mean, it was like, that took a little bit to process in my brain too. And what happens after you see one of these things? I mean, it really messes with your head. I mean, I was doubting my sanity for quite a while, like, did I really see? I mean, what is going on here? What else is weird in this world? There's just been so many different things that have happened around there. I mean, my grandson's toy shovel was stuck 16 feet up in the crotch of a limb of a tree, and it was up there for like 3 weeks. And I was like, did you throw that up there? He goes, I don't know how that got up there, Grandpa. And he come back, 3 weeks later, and it's sitting at the base of the tree, leaning up against the tree. It's like, well, how does that happen? With the bears that we have around here, we have to keep our garbage cans bungeed tight, just like to keep them out of it. And I come out to go to work one day, and there's the 3 garbage cans lined up, except for the first one in the row is flipped completely upside down in the spot that it was sitting the night before, upside right. I mean, what does that, when bears get into garbage, I mean, they make a mess. It's a mess. But yeah, there's just been numerous things that have happened. I've discovered that they really love fireworks. There's been probably 6 or 7 times where we've been, usually we only light off fireworks for the 4th of July if it's wet enough in those mountains to actually do fireworks. I mean, you know how the Cascades can burn. That New Year's Eve, and sometimes on Christmas. Yeah, there's been several times where we've lit off fireworks, have the grandkids over, and then we put them to bed and go out back on the deck, have some adult beverages, and you can hear a couple of sets of footprints moving through the tree line below the house. After a few years, I thought I was pretty good at knowing if they were around. You're like, ooh, man, it feels like they're around. Well, 2 years ago, 4th of July, it was just the wife and I, and we just had some rains on, just before the 4th. So it was wet enough to where we could blow off some mortars. And so what I did is I took 2 mortar tubes and I screwed them into a board, and I was doing doubles. You twist the wicks together, light it, drop them into the tubes, and thump, thump, and you get some nice big booms and lights and all that. Well, I was getting ready to do the 7th pair, and up on that knoll in front of the house, something just started woofing at us. I mean, it was deep. I mean, my wife and I both felt it just in our ribs. But it did it 5 times. It was just and then when this thing took off running across that knoll, it went from 0 to 60 like right now, and it was breaking stuff. I mean, you could hear the weight of this thing, its footfalls just crushing whatever was underneath it. I mean, it took off. And the wife and I went in the house, and she goes, you know what that was? You know what that was? I know what that was. And she goes, maybe it was pissed off. Maybe he doesn't like fireworks. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I thought about it. I was like, maybe he was really excited over the fireworks, and that's how he showed his excitement. But the thing that really freaked me out is he had to have already been on that knoll, because to shoot off 7, 8, mortars, that only takes a few minutes, And I don't know he had to have been closer already up on that knoll to react that way. But yeah, that's one thing I've found out about these things, is they seem to enjoy them.
Now, what about your wife, Tim? Like, obviously she's probably heard of your sightings, and maybe has she had her own experiences besides hearing them?
I was working out of state for quite a while, and there was quite a bit of the time she was at the house by herself, and I kind of feel guilty, but she and I had a visual, a really fast one about 3 years ago, Mother's Day, and I think it was a big gray guy, and it looked like we'd been away from the house all day and visiting with my mother-in-law. And it was just before sunset, and we were starting up the last little bit of our county road to get to our driveway, and it's a switchback. And we're coming around that switchback, and I'm pretty sure it was big. I mean, he was gray like Big Papa, but he was tearing up the hill. It looked like he was on all fours, and I've heard people down south refer to him as no heads. Now, when you see one of these things running away on all fours, I could see why they call them no heads, because all you can see was just the back of this thing. And that was probably maybe 50 yards from the truck looking up the hill. And I mean, he was gone in a flash. I'm like, "Did you see that?" And she goes, "I saw something." But some of the things she had to go through while I was out of town were pretty kind of frightening. I mean, I've never heard the front door handle jiggle in the middle of the night, but she would have that happen. A lot of times when it's just her at the house, she'll just sleep on the couch, and she would have the wall tapping right at where her head was laying outside the wall.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. She would call me in the middle of the night. She goes, "Something is tapping right where my head was at." And I'm like, "Oh, Jesus." I mean, I'm personally am not ever going to pull the trigger on one of these things, because I don't know. I just think in a way they're special. I think they're really like messing with humans, though. Like, we're sort of their entertainment. I got home from work. This was about 2013, and it was September. It was right before the rains hit. And she comes outside as I'm parking in the driveway, and she goes, "Come here, I want to show you something." And she has issues with the bunnies eating on her flowers, and she was walking me over to the flower bed. She pointed down and she says, "Take a look at that." Well, one of her flowers was smashed completely flat, and there was a right footprint that I wear a size 11. This footprint was at least an inch wider on either side of my boot, and probably 6 inches, 7 inches longer than my boot.
Yikes.
And yeah, and this is right up at the front of the house. And I looked up, and it was right up underneath this vaulted window. The entire manufactured house is vaulted all the way through, but then there's a vault in the front. The bottom of this window is 9 feet, and that footprint was like right underneath that window. And she's like, I'm not saying. And I was sitting there kind of nervously chuckling. I was like, "Yeah, I always wondered if they looked in that window." And to this day, I cannot walk by that window at night and not look at it, And goddamn, I hope I never see a face in it. Oh, geez. But yeah, she got yelled at last April. She got up real early to make some pulled pork. She was doing a pork roast, a big old shoulder, and she got up about 3:30 in the morning to start the smoker. And about 4:15, she went out to check on it. And down below the house, there's an old skidder road that parallels our driveway. The driveway goes up to the house, and the skidder road kind of goes down below. And then there's an old logging landing from the late 80s. Nice flat area. We have a fire pit down there. And, I got to tell you some stories about that fire pit. But anyway, it's a nice flat area. Kids' friends will sometimes camp there. There's some kids' friends that won't come back to that place again. But she said it came from right down there. And she said it sounded like an Indian yell. And we tried to pick it up on the Ring camera. And it just, the audio on those things is terrible. But
yes, it is.
That's one thing that once we started putting up floodlights, and especially with the Ring cameras, it really lessened a lot of the activity right up next to the house. When we first installed a motion detector floodlight, we left for the day. It was a Saturday. I think I put them up the night before, or within a couple of nights. But we come back home, and there was a stick ripped out of one of the trees that are alongside the driveway. And there was no wind that day. It was a nice, beautiful day. And the stick is just laying across the driveway as we pulled up. And I'm like, what the hell? I got out, we parked, we took everything inside. And I went out and I looked up in that tree, and it come from about, 14, 15 feet up the tree. And you could see where it'd been ripped away, and it was like too small for like a raccoon to climb out on. I just couldn't figure it out. And I said, okay, went about my day. A couple nights later, I had to go out to the driveway to, I think I was taking some trash out or something. And I was screwing around, and I started coming back to the house. And as soon as I stepped on that, step past that stick, the floodlight came on. And I was like, I wonder if this is like a marker or something. Like, this is how close they can get without triggering the light. I mean, that's speculative. I can't say for sure one way or another.
No, that's a really smart assessment.
That's what it kind of just tripped me out as soon as I stepped across that stick. I'd never bothered to pick it up, and oh wow, the light come on. Yeah, there's probably a few months after my first sighting, which was October. That was 2011. I think it was about March or April of the next year. I decided, okay, these things, if they're around here, fine. I'm leaving them alone. It's not going to keep me from, walking around the property, and, I got state forest right there next to me, hey, this is awesome. For redneck like me, it's perfect. I was walking this ridge line that's a little bit southwest of the house. And years ago, back in the 80s, they'd cut right up to this, the top of this ridge line, and they left a nice stand of trees that drops down into a ravine as you head west up there. And I like walking up through there. The deer trails are really easy to follow. I've seen, foxes, cougars, bobcats, deer. I mean, I've had elk come through their property. So I'm always walking around just looking for sign. And I was up on that ridge, and I was walking along that stand of trees, and I heard this clap come out of the trees. It was a clap, 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 clap. And I know that there's people that live that direction, but they're about a mile, maybe half a mile to a mile through those trees. And it's pretty dense forest. And I stopped, and I was like, well, that sounded like somebody's clapping at me. And so I did it back. I did another, I copied it, whoever it was. And then it did another series of claps, and I just was slowly moving along the trees, and I just kept responding. Whatever clapping sequence it did, I did. And this went on for maybe, 7-10 minutes as I was just slowly moving along the edge of the trees. I don't know if that was somebody up there screwing with me. I don't know, but it definitely sounded like hands, and it never repeated any one of the clapping sequences. I just thought that was really interesting. I mean, are they attempting communication of some kind, or are they just letting me know that, hey, don't go any further than where you're at? I don't know. I just found that really interesting, but that same area, there's an old road bed that was in use like back in the 20s and 30s when they were first starting to log up there. And you can kind of see where this old roadbed goes. It's not too, it runs up towards that ridge, but this, the game trail I follows the ridge. This kind of keeps going up. And the second or third time I decided to follow that, there were two alder trees that were about 3 or 4 inches in diameter that had been yanked out of the ground. I mean, it's completely uprooted from either side of that old roadbed, which is all grown up with, you know, grass and weeds and whatnot. But from either side of that roadbed, these alders have been pulled out of the ground and laid across that old roadbed. And when I saw that, I was like, man, this looks like something I shouldn't mess with. I'm not going to follow this thing back. And I still haven't been back up that way since. I don't know. I know I couldn't pull up a 3 or 4 inch diameter alder tree straight out of the ground. I mean, you could see the holes where they'd been pulled out of. Yeah, I found that pretty interesting. That fire pit down at our campsite. Now that's been the location of some pretty weird stuff. I mean, we've had, old Olympia cans, you know, the beer cans with the old pull tab style.
Mm-hmm.
We've had those left in the fire pit, old come-alongs, logging chain. Here about 3 months ago, we had some wood siding left on that fire pit. And every time there's something left in that fire pit, there's always 2 alder twigs about the size of my index fingers left in a cross or an X shape on top of whatever's left in that fire pit.
Mm.
And that siding, like I said, I don't have very many neighbors. I have not seen any house or any shed around here that even matches that type of siding. It was like 3 or 4 small pieces, you know, maybe foot to 2 foot long. You got me where that came from. I have no idea. And also here, it'd be 3 years ago in April, I was down at that next to that fire pit, and I did kind of a little meditation and stuff. And I'm a heathen. I'm a pagan, Germanic pagan. I decided to carve 4 runes into 4 small trees down there to the east of the fire pit. And I don't know if that has any correlation with what's been happening in the last few years, because that's the same area where that Indian yell came from. There's a fire pit where all the items have been left. When we saw the big gray guy running up the hill, it was towards that same landing there. It's also pretty close to where I had my last visual, which was, what was that? Year ago in April. I believe it was April a year ago, maybe May. But this one was like a really tall, skinny one. I mean, it was skinny. I think it might be the kid, because we've been hearing for the last few years, it sounds like a kid just chattering off in the woods. I mean, my grandson's heard it. Everybody has heard this. I mean, the granddaughters have heard it. My wife's heard it. It just sounds like a kid just talking away out in the woods. And every once in a while you hear like a whoosh, like, shut up, they're out here, or something like that. But I think this one guy was coming around that same, coming home. Nobody was at the house yet. My wife was in town. I was coming around that hairpin, that switchback to head up to the house. And this thing was dropping down into the brush to hide. And when it dropped down, it kind of reminded me of, I think it was Todd Standing when he had that video of the one dropping down to hide. It like threw its arms out. That's what this thing did. It threw its arms out, and you could see the black hair flying up as this thing was dropping. And the speed in which it dropped that was impressive. I mean, I don't think I could fall that fast, to be honest with you. It was just going down into the brush, and its arm span must have been 7.5 feet, but this thing was just lanky, and it just looked like it kind of reminded me of like a twiggy teenage girl, I mean, I don't know what sex it was, but that thing. And then when I got up to the house, I let my dog out. This dog we have now, I mean, he's fought a bear. I mean, he's treed cougars. I mean, he's treed bears. This dog is freaking fearless. But I got up to the house and I was like, hey, come out here. And he went and sniffed down over the hill, and he put his ears back and ran right back in the house. Whatever was down there, he didn't want anything to do with. And yeah, and like I said, I've had a lot of flashes of something in the woods, but another one that really freaked me out is I was home alone. It was before our daughter got married, and wife and daughter, I think they were out of town. I think they were down at the beach with their mom or something, staying the night. So I had the house to myself, and it was a Saturday, and I drank a few beers. I'm laying on the couch watching a movie when I ended up falling asleep, and I woke up about 11:30. The house is all dark, and I was like, oh, I'll just step out front and have a smoke. And I opened up the front door and I stepped out, and there was something right at the corner of the house. And from the front door to the corner of the house is about 16 feet. And there was something standing there at the corner of the house. Its head was as tall or taller than the eaves of the house. And this thing took a jump. I didn't see its knees bend or anything. I mean, this thing jumped at least 20 feet over the hill, and it went down through the trees. It's probably about a 40-foot drop down to the skidder road below. And I slept with a 30-06 that night. I mean, I think I scared it as much as it scared me, but I don't think it thought anybody was home. And I came opening the door up, and the light came on. The light shoots out straight from the house, and this thing was directly to my left. And yeah, that freaked me out. I mean, this thing, it was all black or dark brown. I couldn't tell. I mean, it happened so fast. But the next day, I went down below, and I could see where it had left some impressions in the skidder road. The skidder road's just all grown over with grass. I keep it mowed, but I could see where it had hit, and I could kind of see where it kept going down towards the main river road, down towards the bottom of the canyon. Yeah, that one, I slept on the couch with 30-06 on the coffee table. I mean, that just, I mean, I was within 20 feet of this thing.
It sounds like you scared him too.
I think so. I mean, but the way this thing jumped just blew me. I mean, if I were to attempt a jump like that, I'd have to bend down and then throw myself up. But this thing, it looked like it went from a standing position and launched itself a good 20 feet to clear the edge of where the hill starts to drop away. I mean, it was just, I don't even know how something could move like that. I mean, it blew me away. But yeah, there's been the ice shine. I mean, oh God, ever since we installed them floodlights, every so often, there's this one tree. It's a really nice sized Doug fir up at the top of the driveway. And I was unemployed for a while, and I couldn't sleep one night. And it was probably about 1:30, 2 in the morning. I went out front for a smoke, and this Doug fir is exactly 100 yards. I ranged it with my rangefinder, and there was a pair of eyes that would peek out from around the tree and then slide back in and then peek out the other side. My one neighbor, he thought I was nuts all this time until last year. He called me at work and he goes, "When you get home, I need to talk to you." Well, he saw the same color, about the same size eyes I've seen. They're kind of a lime colored, yellowish green kind of color. And they're about the size of a bottom of a Coke can. And he saw those peering at him from, where our road dead ends. There's a county sign there that says end of county road. And yeah, ever since then, I think he's kind of more in tune to it. Got another neighbor who lives across the holler and up the road a little bit from me. And for the last 2 springs, he's got this Bing cherry tree that's, it's probably, 15, 20 feet tall. And he'll come out in the morning and all the cherries are completely gone. There's no pits, nothing. They're just gone. And this has happened the last 2 years in a row. And he's like, "Tim, I don't know what's going on." I was like, "Well, I can tell you what's going on. Them big sons of bitches are coming in here eating your cherry."
What does he say when you say that? Is he not of the mind that this could be a real thing?
Now, since they retired, they're a little bit more receptive to it. He's also my landlord, but there was a few years back, we were building a storage shed. I was out there helping him, and people talk about that really nasty smell. The only thing I've ever really smelled is just a real heavy BO. I mean, it's just a heavy, like somebody, like a bum who hasn't washed in a long time. And we're sitting there hammering away, building this thing. And it smelled like it was coming from up the hill. And I'm like, you guys smell that? And they were like, yeah. Like, you guys know what that is? Like, no. And they just went back to work. But I think they're starting to wake up a little. I don't know what kind of experiences they've had, but the whistling, like my great grandmother's brother, he was a logger back in the 20s and 30s up in the Cascades, and they called them whistle punks back then. And I can see why, because some of these whistles, I mean, here's just a couple months ago, me and one of my granddaughters, we got home before everybody and went to let the dog out the back door, and I walked out onto the deck, and it was your classic, that whistle, like, like that, except it was loud. I mean, it was really loud, and it was down inside of the tree line. But as soon as the dog heard that, he was right back in the door. Again, he wanted nothing to do with that.
Whistle punks. I don't know that I've ever heard that before. I like that.
Yeah, well, my great uncle, he never really told me any stories. He knew that I didn't grow up hunting. It was something that I started in my 20s, but he would always say that there's things in them woods you just don't mess with. He was a grizzled old guy, lived to be 97, and yeah, I guess that's what they called them back in the day, was whistle punks. I always thought that was kind of a cool name, but
that's a really cool name. Yeah.
but yeah, it's been an interesting deal. Do you want to get into the orb thing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because you're on a great roll, and I've, of course, got questions, but I just want you to keep on going, because you have so much going on there, and now it changes a little bit, and we'll talk about if you think that it's connected or not. But yes, please, go right ahead.
Now, I don't know what to make of these orbs. Now, if it's just lights in the woods, I've picked them up on my game cameras. I mean, I've had a spate of game cameras just go out, like 3 of them in 3 days. They just quit working. I don't understand. I don't get it. But I've picked these things up on my game cameras. Now, if it's just light, how is it setting off that IR beam to make it take pictures? That one kind of gets me. But the first time I saw them, it was wintertime. When all the leaves are off the trees, if I'm standing on my back deck, I can see 3 lights from a house that's about a mile up the river from me. And I'm up on a mountainside. And these people live right down near the river. And those are the only 3 lights I can see from from my property in the wintertime. In the summer, you can't see those lights. I'm standing back there one night, and it's pretty cold out. I'm just having a smoke. And I was like, what's that? There's a 4th light. I mean, but it didn't look like it was at the same location. And it was like, I couldn't tell like the distance of it. It didn't look like a regular, like house light or anything like that, or flood lamp. And I was just trying to figure it out. I was just staring at this thing like, what the hell, And then I just like, okay, whatever. He went back inside, kind of forgot about it for a while. And every so often, you just kind of like see this weird glow off in the trees. The one that really got all of us, we ended up calling the sheriff. I mean, it was an October night. It was about 9:30. We were all getting ready to go to bed. We had my daughter and her family living with us, and kids were already in bed. It sounded like a shotgun almost, but it also had that kind of crackling boom kind of sound, like lightning. And it sounded like it was right in the backyard. And we were like, what the hell? We shut off all the lights in the house. Who the hell? I'm thinking it's a poacher or something. But I mean, we have wind-driven rain going sideways on an October night. Who the hell is going to be out there, tromping around on private property where there's really no trails or anything? So we shut out all the lights, and we're looking out the windows into the backyard, and there's 4 of these lights, and they look like they're just inside of the tree line. There was a white one, a really light blue one, a light green one, a yellowish kind of, I don't know, like khaki kind of yellowish. But there was 4 of them, and 2 of them are just like slowly moving through the trees. And we're like, what the hell is this? My wife, she's like, screw this. So we're calling the deputies. Oh, it took them an hour to get there. like they always said they would take. And it's a driving rain. They parked at the top of the driveway and walked down to the house, whatever cops are trained to do. We bring them in the house and we're like, look at these lights out here. And they kind of look at them and they're like, is there any access down there? I was like, well, there is this little access road that, the power line company uses down off the main river road. But it'd been so wet that year, there's no way a vehicle could get up there, And they're like, yeah, we tend to see these, several times a year. Just have a good night. We'll go see what we can see. So we kept all the lights off in the house, and we could see them with their flashlights way down below. We could see their flashlights moving up towards where these lights were, and they got nowhere near where it looked like these orbs or whatever they are, balls of plasma. I don't know. But the thing about where these things were at, the way the land drops, the way the terrain drops away back there at the tree, in our backyard to the tree line and then past the tree line, those things would have had to have been 30 to 50 feet off the ground. At least 3 of them would have been, if I was judging the distance correctly. The other one, the solid white one, it never seemed to move, and it was more to the west of the other 3. Yeah, that really we were all kind of freaked out about that. It's like, what the hell, because it's not like a beam or anything. It just sort of like I don't know, like, is iridescent the right word? It was just like a plasma looking thing. I don't know. But I've seen those things quite a few times. And I mean, when I see those things, screw it. I'm done. Whatever I'm doing outside, I'm in the house. It's like, I'm not messing with those. I've heard a lot of stories about orbs and Bigfoot and all this stuff. I don't know what to make of it. I kind of like what Ron Moorhead has to say. He goes, he's talking about, maybe they're able to alter their vibrational frequency, and maybe that's how that's the way we see them when they're in that state. I don't know. I have no clue. But yeah, just recently I saw like these pin lights. They look like pin lights up on the knoll in front of the house. And that knoll in front of the house, we found a big bedding area. I came home for the 4th of July. I think it was 2016. I'd been working out of state. And my son-in-law is like, hey, let me show you this. Come up here, So he takes me up that knoll, and it looked like a bedding area that was about 12 foot in diameter. And when you're up on that knoll, you can look right down into and you can see the entire parking area, the front of the garage, the front of the house, and one side of the house. But when you're at the house looking up, you can't see anything up there. And this whole 10, 12 foot diameter area was just completely flattened. Everything, it looked like it had been laid on and rolled around on. And I know, when bears, when they curl up to take a nap, they leave a little tiny, like, maybe 4 foot diameter area where they'll curl up. But this was just enormous. I mean, it would have taken a whole family of bears to flatten it out like that. Yeah, I found that really interesting myself. I mean, we've had the foot pounding. I mean, it just, like coming from 3 locations down below the house at night.
Like it sounds like something very large is stomping its foot, like on the ground as hard as it can.
Yeah, but from like 3 locations,
Mm-hmm.
like there's 3 of them. And that was happening. Let's say it was one of my hunting buddies. It was his son's 15th birthday, and him and 2 of his friends wanted to camp out up there. Well, me and my hunting partner, we ended up getting drunk and passing out. Well, the girls were still up, and they were out on the back deck, and they heard one coming from the west of the house, just like boom, boom, boom. One straight back from the house, boom, like three stomps, and then another one over near where the boys were camped out. Well, the next morning, the boys are up having breakfast, and they're like, was that you guys messing with us last night? And I was like, me and your dad got drunk and passed out, man. But the girls heard it, and his mom was like, my wife asked her, you going to go down there and check on the boys? She goes, I ain't going down there.
They're fine.
But, I've never had any, other than getting hit in the back of the leg with a rock one time, I've never had anything really aggressive or anything like that.
Now, where were you when you got hit on the back of the leg with the rock?
That was towards the bottom of my driveway. A buddy of mine, he helped me get a load of bricks up to the house. I was building a new fire pit, and he had this really long 40-foot trailer. We couldn't turn it around in the driveway because it was just too short. So I was guiding him back down the driveway, which is, it's about a 250-yard long driveway. It goes up a hill and then back down. And I was helping him back out, and his truck had one of those backup alarms, and that thing's going beep, 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 beep. And I'm just kind of like flagging him down, and this little rock about the size of a silver dollar, a piece of basalt chip, it looked like, came and just hit me right in the back of the calf. I mean, it hit hard too. I was looking around. I'm like, my neighbor, he's retired now. He couldn't throw. He has a bad shoulder. He couldn't throw a rock that far, that hard anyway. I don't know where it came from, but I got hit in the back of the leg. I had a bruise on my calf for about 2 weeks. But
I wonder if the beeping was annoying to them.
Yeah, what's funny is I have a work truck now that has one of those backup alarms. So,
well, now they're used to it. They're like, well, nothing we can do about that.
I mean, me and another hunting partner, we got growled at heading down into the bottom of that holler. He wanted to check it out. He was a skeptic for quite a while. I mean, he's another Northwest, his nickname is Hillbilly. I mean, this guy, he's an elk hunting fool. He knows the woods pretty well. I mean, he's had his own experiences and kind of, he doesn't think I'm so crazy anymore, but me and his son and he were walking down the old roadbed that goes down into the bottom of the holler, and there was something off in the weeds that it growled at us, and you could feel it in your chest. I mean, it was vibrating our ribs, and he stops dead in his tracks, and he's a good 6'5". He's a big guy. He goes, that ain't no bear. He goes, let's get out of here. So we just turned around and headed back out. But,
and did that seem like it was coming from something crouched, at ground level?
Yeah, it was definitely ground level. In fact, as low as the brush is right there, I'm thinking it would have had to have been on its belly or something, because the brush at that time of year was only 3 feet tall, maybe. That was underneath the power lines where they keep it pretty well cut down. But something grumbled at us, I mean, really deep, and it lasted for probably close to 10 seconds. But I was kind of done. I thought it was time to get out of there. But I mean, that was right near the bottom of that boulder field that I was originally talking about. And that boulder field is critter central. I mean, I found parts of dead things down there that I couldn't even recognize. I'm thinking that might have been ferrets or something like that. I mean, there's always different kinds of droppings down in there, scat, Oh, speaking of scat, there was something that happened it was about 6 months prior to having my sighting. We were in South Central Washington. It was turkey season. And I'll go ahead and say where this was at. It was near the Klickitat River. And it'd been kind of a slow few days. We'd been camping out, me and my wife, and then my hunting partner, his wife, and then his 2 kids were with him. And one morning, my friend's son, he was 7 years old at the time. He wanted to do a morning hunt with us. So we all put on our camo, and he grabbed his BB gun. And the game trails up in this area it's almost like people keep them up. I mean, there's so much game up there. I mean, it's easy to follow game trails in that part of the state. It's not so heavily wooded like the west side of the Cascades, where this is on the east side of the Cascades. So it's more pine forest than it is fir. Well, we're walking along this game trail heading up out of the camp. We were maybe half, 3/4 of a mile away from the camp. And I don't know how my partner, he was in the lead. I don't know how he missed these 2 piles of poop. But as soon as the little 7-year-old seen it, he pointed down and he goes, Sasquatch poop. And I'm looking down, and there's 2 piles about 20 feet apart that each pile was the size of 3 bananas. And I'm kind of an amateur scatologist, and I'm looking at it, and it was springtime, and I know that there was a big salmon run going on in the river that time of year. And it looked like whatever it was had been eating a lot of fish. Well, I decided to stick my pinky in it, and it wasn't cold. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold.
Uh-oh.
And I called my partner over. I'm like, dude, how did you miss? You walked right by these two giant piles of poop. And as we're discussing it, down the hill from us comes the worst bull elk imitation bugle that I've ever heard in my life. I mean, I've heard guys try to blow an elk bugle and sound like crap. This was horrible, but it was loud. And we're like, elk, as far as I know, they only bugle during mating season, during the rut. This is May. And there's this god awful elk bugle down the hill from us while we're discussing this poop. And I don't know, that was like 6 months before I knew what was going on back home. But there was another thing that happened. It was right around my 30th birthday. This is well before Sasquatch was on my brain, but looking back, I think this is kind of an interesting deal. It was my birthday. My birthday's in June. I was recently divorced at the time. So me and my buddies, we were like, screw it, let's go camp on the beach. So we went down to the Oregon coast, and I'll go ahead and tell where this is at too. This is a South Jetty, heading towards the South Jetty of Tillamook Bay. And you can leave your car parked overnight in the parking lot, but you can't sleep in your car. You can sleep on the beach overnight, but you just can't sleep in your car. So we're going to do a camp out. We called ourselves the Rossi Posse. We'd each get a big jug of Carlo Rossi wine, and we'd go down, we'd build a giant fire and sleep on the beach and get wasted and just, be idiots. But we hiked about 2 miles north on that beach, and there's a big old sand dune that's probably 80, 100 feet tall. And at the base of it, there's more driftwood than we could burn. And there was like 6 or 7 of us. And we just get log after log after log and just feed these fires all night. But as we got there, we started poking around, figuring out where we were going to camp and stuff, and started getting some firewood together. And I wandered back, and right at the base of that sand dune was this structure. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is in March before my birthday. This was in March. I'm sorry. And it just so happened to be a really warm March weekend, and it'd been kind of a nasty winter. And we were poking around. Right at the base of the sand dune was the most well-built structure that you could imagine made out of drift logs. There was a ridge log that was probably at like a 30-degree angle that was stuck into the sand. And this thing was a good sized log. It would have taken all 6 or 7 of us just to even try to move this thing. Then there was other logs laid up against it on either side, to where it was kind of like you got the ridge line, and then you have these logs laid up, and then in between the logs there was beach grass that had been bundled up and then twisted with beach grass, and you could tell that they started at the bottom to fill in between the logs. So whoever built it started at the bottom and worked their way up, and when you stepped inside of this thing, it dropped down about a foot. It's like all the sand had been drug out of the bottom of this thing, and the door was to the north. And if you know the Pacific Northwest, in the wintertime, our storms come out of the south. When you got inside this thing, you could barely even hear the surf breaking. This thing was so well built. Some of the bigger logs towards the entrance, it would have taken 4 or 5 of us just to try to heave that thing up and lean it up against that ridgepole log. I called the guys over. I'm like, dudes, look at this thing. And it was just, all 6 or 7 of us could have slept in that and still had plenty of room. And it's funny because just across the peninsula right there, the South Jetty Peninsula, there's an oyster farm. And we'd sneak over there in the middle of the night and grab a bunch of oysters. There's clams. there's all sorts of foodstuffs down there. But that just kind of blew me away years later, after knowing that there's these cousins of ours, I guess, that live in the woods. Why wouldn't they, in the wintertime on the Oregon coast, you ain't going to catch many people taking long walks on the beach. It was just, we were all just marveling at that structure, though. How well built it was. It was dry inside. I don't know if you could have gotten that thing wet on the inside with a fire hose, as well built as that was.
And Tim,
But
do you know if the mussel and oyster farm would be running all year long?
oh yeah. Those
Oh,
oysters, I mean, it's a farm. I mean, well, it's not so much a farm. Somebody owns it, and it's a natural oyster bed,
mm-hmm.
and oysters are going to be there all year long.
Well, it's a good place to set up a little mini hotel then.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's clams. I mean, there's stuff that washes up on the beaches. Those storms in the wintertime, there's all sorts of stuff that washes up on the beach. I mean, I've seen a partial dead horse years ago. What was left of it that must have washed down a river during a flood and then come back in. But yeah, always thought that, looking back on that, I was like, I tried to get a hold of some of my old friends, but I don't know where they're at anymore. But I just kind of wanted to question them to see what they thought of it. But we were all pretty impressed with that structure, though. I mean, it would have, just to get that ridgepole set, would have taken heavy machinery. Yeah, there's been all sorts of stuff. Them BFRO people, they call it habituation, and it's like, man, I did not come into this with the idea of living with. And people ask me, what do you think they are? I have no clue, man. I don't know what these things are. I know that the ones that I've seen up close, the big guy, I mean, he looked awfully human, but I have no idea what. I found a butt print one time, just like maybe 60 feet from the house, down the hill behind the house. And it was up against this tree. And it was in the fall, probably about 4 years ago. And I was burning off a bunch of stuff. In the spring and fall, I'm constantly burning, everything I can burn, just in case a fire does come through. I try to lessen the fuel load around the house. I was down there, I had a fire going, and I was walking around, just picking up, dead sticks and letting branches that have fallen off. And I noticed this impression where it looked like somebody had sat down up with their back to this tree, which, like I said, is only about 60 feet from that, 70 feet from the house. And it was a big butt impression. And I was like, what the hell, and I could look, I kind of sat in it, and I could see where the feet had been planted, where it looked like they'd moved their heels around or something, but it was like 3 feet from where my heels could have hit it, And I was sitting there, and we had the grandkids over for the weekend, and it was kind of a cold day, and all the windows and stuff were closed up on the house. But I sat there and I started listening. Even with all the windows and doors closed up, you could hear everything going on inside that house. And I was like, holy crap, dude. That kind of freaked me out, because it was like being that close to the house and then realizing they could sit there and just hear everybody talking in the house, and it just creeped me out. We have double pane windows and stuff, but there's no background noise really to speak of in the mountains. I mean, the wind, and there's been a lot of rain. You can hear the water down on the river down below us in the canyon. But yeah, that kind of tripped me out a little bit. But
Tim, I lived in the Seattle area for a time, and in another part of Washington down south, where my father had property. But something that I noticed about people in Seattle area specifically, and it doesn't happen here in Vegas, is that people will leave. And in your area is obviously different, because like you said, you have one neighbor. You probably can't see his house from your house. But do you guys have blinds or curtains up, or are you kind of like other people I know in Washington State and Seattle, that they just have their, the windows wide open at night and the lights on, so that if something was outside, it could see in very easily?
No, after I realized what we were dealing with, I've never liked dark windows at night. Ever since I was a kid. I mean, funny enough, I remember being about 7, 8 years old before we moved back to the Northwest, just seeing that, what was that, In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and they were talking about Bigfoot. I remember laying awake one night just being so freaked out that Bigfoot could be standing out my window staring at me. No, after I had my sighting, we got the blackout blinds. We got big, heavy curtains for the sliding back door. No, when the sun goes down, the blinds are closed, the floodlights are on. I mean,
I don't blame you.
I did have, there was, what was it, last summer? We have the cameras and the floodlights on the front and back of the house. But last summer, there was a slap right up my head on the bedroom wall as I was going to sleep. And I've since built a garage, but if they come up from the east or the west on the ends of the house, they can avoid the lights. And my bed is right at the corner of the house, and there was something that slapped right where the top of my head was. And I was like, damn it. I mean, I've heard the foot pounding, like them running up our driveway from the side of the house, like before we had the floodlights put in. And I mean, the speed of the footfalls, like when that thing took off from the fireworks, I mean, it's almost like cartoonish how fast their feet would have to be moving to make those. It's just insane, how fast their feet would have to be moving to make sounds like that, like they're running and stuff. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and
I don't know what to make of these things. I really don't.
And
I'm not going anywhere. I mean, I live in a really beautiful place. I don't have to mess with neighbors. If we don't have the kids over, the grandkids over, we can go outside butt naked and pee wherever we want, But
I mean, I certainly wouldn't be leaving. I mean, as long as nobody's that terrified and things don't escalate, I wouldn't leave either. I don't blame you. Yeah, the whole curtain thing or the blind thing. The fact that you just brought up the slap right where your head is, and then the whole tapping thing with your wife right where her head is. So it behooves us to say that they were probably watching you guys quite a bit before the curtains went up and knew right where you guys would be laying.
Well, I snore like a Harley Davidson too, so I mean that probably doesn't help. But the thing that really got me about the fingernail tapping, like right before I found out where it was coming from, was the sliding back door. Going out onto the deck. It's an 8-foot wide deck. After I seen that dude, I realized he probably has the arm length to stand at the edge of the deck, reach over the railing and that 8 feet and tap on that sliding glass door. That's what really blew me away. Is like, holy crap. I mean, I never did see the big guy's arms or anything. I could just see like his upper arm and his shoulders, like mid chest. I mean, honestly, I hate to say it, but he was like a pretty handsome critter. I mean, I realized real quick that I ain't the alpha predator out here anymore, but I mean, I every time I take the granddaughters on a walk, around the property, we do what we call the loop walk, which is you go out the back door, you walk down through the yard, down to that camping area, up the skidder road, and then up the driveway back to the house. It's, about a half-mile walk. The girls love it, but I always take a sidearm with me because, there are bears, there's coyotes, there's cougars. I've seen the cougars up there about 8 different times. I mean, I know that they're around, and, with the recent snow we just had, one of them left some nice imprints at the top of the driveway. And I have seen what looked like mother and child tracks in the snow at the top of our driveway in years past. I had a whole bunch of pictures on my last phone, but that phone got destroyed and I wasn't able to recover a lot of pictures. I did have pictures of those. I sent you the ones of the ones in the dust. I believe I sent you those, but I think that was one of the kids. But anyway, the grandkids, they like to do the loop walk, and I always take a sidearm with me. And one time the oldest, she goes, "Is that for Bigfoot?" I'm like, "Oh, no. You don't shoot them because they're special." And she's like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, it's for us. It's definitely a reality, I mean, a lot of people in that canyon have stories. I mean, about 4 months after I had my initial sighting, I was down at there's a country store, and it's like the hub of our community up there. And there's one of the guys, he lives little ways up the river from me but he's right on the river. He's a deacon in the church, business owner, pretty well-respected guy. And I come walking into the country store, and he's standing there telling his story. He goes, yeah, I was getting ready for work about 4:30 in the morning, and I opened up the door, flicked on the outside light, and I saw somebody duck behind a rhododendron bush on the edge of my yard. He goes, I opened the door further to look out, and he said this big gray thing took off running like a chimp on all fours towards the river. And he said this thing popped up onto two legs, and he said it looked like it was ice skating at 40 miles an hour as it hit the tree line. And he said he heard it hit the water, because right at that stretch of river, it's really shallow. He said he heard it hit the water and then started tearing up the hillside on the far side of the river. Yeah, I've heard quite a few stories of that country store. I mean, the BFRO, that TV show they had, the only thing I liked about that TV show was the town meetings that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they filmed 4 times in Skamania County that I know of for that show, and they'd leave flyers up at the country store and whatnot. There was I went down, it was a few years ago, I went down to get a 6-pack on a Sunday afternoon, and during halftime I go walking up to the door, and one of the people that works there at the store, she's one of the family members that owns it. She's like, everybody tells her the Bigfoot story. She's like the Bigfoot lady. And she's like, Tim, come here. Hey, she was talking with this mother, and her son at the time was about 17. And they live across the canyon and over the next ridge from where I live. She was all, tell Tim what you saw last night. And so they're sitting there telling me, they said they were watching a movie, had all the lights off in the house, and the movie got over. They were walking from their living room towards their kitchen, and they had their blinds, like halfway closed. And they said it was about 11 o'clock at night, 10:30, 11. And they said they could see something out at their garbage cans. Now, most of us don't have garbage service because we're just too far out. We have to take our stuff to the dump. Well, they said they didn't go all the way up to the window, but they got within a few feet of the window and watched this thing. And they said it was black and about 8 foot tall and really bulky. The mother said she thought it was a female, but they never did see the front of it. But it was at their garbage cans and was holding a Walmart bag, and it was picking stuff out of their garbage can, putting it in the bag. When it got done, it picked up everything off the ground, put it all back in the garbage can, closed the lid, and went walking down their driveway with a Walmart bag full of goodies.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. They said it. They said they don't think that they don't think it knew that it was being watched. But I think when you leave the lights off in a house, and if there's like no activity, I'm almost sure that they know what cars, because we got a vehicle or two, living in the country, you always have a vehicle or two that's not running. But I think they know which vehicles run and when you're home and when you're not home. And that one must have assumed that, no, nobody's home or they're all asleep. Yeah, I've heard there's a lot of people that just won't talk about it, but I've heard quite a few stories from this area. It's definitely when I initially called the BFRO, when I first had my sighting, about 3 weeks later, I called them up. I didn't know who to get a hold of. I didn't know anything about the Bigfoot world or any of that. And when I was talking to those guys, I told them the general area where I lived, and they said, oh, that watershed that you live in, we think there could be up to 15 family units living in that watershed. And I was like, well, I don't doubt it. I mean, it's a really healthy forest, no matter what the anti-logging people have to say. It's a very healthy forest. I mean, we've got, salamanders and tree frogs all the way up to very healthy, large bears. I mean, some of the bears I've got on my game camera are over 400 pounds. So, I mean, it's a pretty healthy forest. And if they're intelligent, as they say they are, and as stealthy and as fast, and if they're nocturnal, and I think they are because their eyes reflect light, that means they can see at night, and they don't want to be found, you ain't going to find them. I mean, it doesn't take very long from my house till you're really in basically the wilderness. I mean, it's 20-minute drive, and you could abandon your vehicle. And if you were a true survivalist, you could probably find a cave somewhere up in them hills and, never be found again if you wanted.
Yeah, I can attest to that from being in that area. Like I said earlier, it's a stunning area, and it is so dense on the ground as well. You have all kinds of brush. It would be nice if people that are naysayers about it would, even just the fact that, oh, there's not enough space, there's nowhere for them to hide. Go to Gifford Pinchot in Washington State and then say that.
Yeah, I mean, back when I first got out of the Navy in the early 90s, I remember it was long before I ever moved up to where I'm at now, but I remember driving up that river road, and I'd put about, 3 5-gallon cans of gas in the back of my truck. I had food. I had plenty of water. I went driving up that river road into those mountains, and this was before they started gating everything off. And I drove for 3 days and came out near Mount Rainier. I have no idea how I did it or how I got there, but and I didn't see a single soul for 3 days. There was no other vehicles. Back then, the federal government was still maintaining logging roads and the bridges and stuff. And I came out near Randall, Washington. I could not retrace my steps these days, but I mean, I just camped out all by myself. I'd find a beautiful spot, where there's a nice little waterfall, maybe stop along a creek and hike up the creek, do a little fishing, catch your dinner. I mean, I found areas back up in there that you can't even get to anymore because of the different logging companies and whatnot, where, I mean, it was like a page out of a fairy tale book. Moss that's 6 inches thick, ringing a pool at the base of a waterfall. I mean, just absolute gorgeous, but nobody would ever find you if you didn't want to be found.
No. No, it looks like something straight out of a mix between Jurassic Park and then the end scene of Harry and the Hendersons, where you see Harry, but you don't see the rest of his family at first, especially the first time you see the movie. And then until they move, you didn't even know they were there.
Yeah. I talked to this old Klickitat Indian, and he says that his family has traded with them for generations, but he can't get the younger guys to go anymore because it freaks him out too much. But he said there was a certain place up near Indian Heaven where his family would go for years and years, and they would get like some of the more exotic mushrooms and whatnot that grow in the Pacific Northwest that people pay big money for. And he said one thing he would trade with them was he'd take 2 1-gallon milk jugs full of coffee. And he said the big male would always be the first one that would come out, and he would just down those 2 jugs of coffee. And then after about 15 minutes, he'd run off in the woods and just basically have explosive diarrhea of it. I don't know. I don't know if this guy was pulling my leg. I don't know why he would.
That's a hell of a story.
but yeah, I mean, I here recently in the last 4 or 5 months, I've heard this call down towards the river, and I don't know, it sounded like there was 2 of them, but it was kind of like this, like this really pain to kind of, I don't know if they were hunting something, but I asked one of the guys that belongs to the volunteer fire department, because I know he lives closer to where those sounds were coming from, and he's like, yeah, I don't know what that was the other night. I saw him at the country store, and I was like, hey, did you hear something? He goes, yeah, whatever it was loud. I was like, well, I was hearing it up at my place, and I'm probably a good 400 feet in elevation, and then I don't know, maybe about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile distance wise from him. But yeah, it sounded like there's a couple of them going off down there. But,
you bring up the trading and the respect from the natives in whatever area that they're in when it comes to these creatures and, people, whatever you want to think that they are, out there, everybody. But when I was on the Brown property with Wes and everybody, I had the orb sighting, of course, and other interesting things go down, but everyone's heard me tell those ad nauseum. But it is located on the Chehalis Indian Reservation, and one of the neighbors, of course, he had lived there his entire life, and he said, yes, once the salmon start to run through the river that ran through that valley there, no matter what, the first few that they would catch, they would leave there for the Bigfoot, always, every single time, without fail.
Yeah, I've heard some interesting things about that Chehalis area, that river valley, or that river watershed up there. I've heard from some natives that there's an area, there's some mountain that's off one of the tributaries of that river where in the summertime they're supposed to have like this huge rendezvous where there's like 30, 40 of these things all meet up every year. I mean,
God, can
I've
you
heard some pretty
imagine? Can you imagine seeing that, like coming up on that scene?
Oh my God.
Now, that's the real
Lord.
Bigfoot conference. See, we make our own Bigfoot conferences. Guess what? They have their own too.
Yeah, I've heard there's parts of that Chehalis River that a lot of the natives won't fish, but I've hunted up in that area and up around like Rainbow Falls and stuff, and it doesn't take much to get out into the middle of nowhere up in that area either.
No.
And that's a really pretty area, that little low mountain range in between the ocean and the valleys there. It's pretty nice up in there. Yeah, with the river that I live, I don't want to give away the name of it or anything, but when people first started settling out here, the natives would tell them, you don't want to move up that river. That's not where you're supposed to go. That's their place. And I mean, I'm 15 miles from the nearest town, but I mean, we do have, there's probably about 60, 70 mailboxes between where I'm at and the absolute wilderness area, not wilderness, but national forest. I think these things don't live as far out as people think they do. I think a lot of them probably inhabit areas a lot closer to us than we realize. I mean, I think they're just as adaptable to situations as, us modern humans are, and who knows, maybe like Ron Moorhead says, maybe they're a pay grade ahead of us. Maybe they don't need civilization and technology and all that. Like, we kind of think pretty highly of ourselves, I think, I think a lot of it's misplaced sometimes, but if I could survive without fire, I mean, that would be incredible, And when it comes to like their living situation, I mean, back in 1983, the Forest Service started taking all the cave locations off their maps because they were getting tired of rescuing people out of caves, And my brother was with the Forest Service for a while, and I've been hounding him for some of his older maps because the Cascade Mountains are just littered with caves and lava tubes, and a lot of them, I mean, they could be easily concealed, especially if you had the strength of these things, if they wanted to, put a giant log or a boulder in the way of a cave, then there's that whole idea about the Fae folk. I mean, I've been starting to listen to people putting those two things together, like with the Bigfoot and the Fae. And if you look back at like what the Norse described as trolls, they were hairy giants that lived out in the forest and practiced strange magic. Sounds like Bigfoot to me. I mean, but yeah, when it comes to the whole gifting thing, I've never been really a fan of that because I don't want them to rely on us for anything, I mean, there's been a couple of times where we've been like took a weekend at the beach or have been gone for a weekend and come home and there's these almost perfectly round river stones stacked in a pyramid right dead center of our front porch. That's happened a couple of times. I don't know. It sounds weird, but I think maybe they're cool with us. I mean, I thought I was a really awesome, woodsman and stuff. It took me 9 years to find this spring on the property. All the old timers down at the country stores, like they talk about the guy who originally settled the property up here in the 40s. And they're like, oh yeah, he had that spring up there on that property. And it took me 9 years to find this spring, and it was literally like 200 feet from my house.
Right.
I'm like, I mean, it's and then once I found the spring, I'm thinking, well, this could obviously be something maybe that they're interested in, food, water, cover. What else do they need? Just like any other, critter in the forest. It's a decent sized spring. I found the old ram pump that the original fella had used. I was thinking about maybe using that spring as another backup water supply. But then I was wondering, would that get them irritated and would they destroy my stuff or, should I?
Right, because we've heard that they don't always like change very much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a very big spring. It's maybe 5 foot in diameter, but you can see the old concrete where they, it's all mossed over and grown over, which is probably part of the reason why it took me forever to find it. But, and when that night of the 4th of July, when that thing took off running through the woods, it went charging right towards the area that spring. And that's the same area where we've heard a lot of what it sounds like that kid chattering off in the woods seem to be coming from the general area of the spring.
So how many areas specifically around your home, do you feel like it's a no-no area that you don't want you to go in there, your grandkids, your wife, anybody?
Well, the grandkids don't go anywhere outside without an adult. I don't think there's much of a no-no area. If they let us have the day, they can have the night. That's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, the one time we got growled at, it might be because they didn't recognize, my friend and his son.
Mm-hmm.
I go hunting right out the door. I got all this area to, I don't have to go anywhere to go hunting. I've shot a bear 23 yards from my front door before. I don't, it's kind of funny because when in between there was a several year period where we didn't have any dogs at all. And we'd wake up in the morning and there would be 2 does and their kids, either twins or their single kid or whatever. They would be sleeping like within 20 feet of the house, almost like it was like they were trying to avoid something, I mean, I don't know if I've never found a deer kill. Well, no, I take that back. I did find one, but that was on somebody else's property. Yeah, when we didn't have dogs, I mean, one time we had a buck fawn walk right into the dining room. That wife had a sliding glass door open. It was just her and the grandson. He was about 7, 8 years old at the time. And she heard something and stands up and looks around the wall and there's a buck fawn standing
my
right
God.
there. But, yeah, they've never messed with our chickens. I mean, the bears have messed with the chickens, the bobcats, the coyotes. I mean, they've all messed with the chickens, but I mean, the chicken coop is just within range of the backdoor camera. So.
And that has the light on it, right? So anything that has the light on it, they tend to avoid that.
Yeah. Well, from Wes's show, I mean, he was talking about that years ago and it was like, oh no, really? That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I actually ran into Wes about 2 years ago. I seen him at a bar and I was like, hey, I was on one of his episodes, but I don't want to promote his show on your show. But
no, it's fine. I talk about Wes all the time. That's not a problem.
He is such a gentle-hearted man. I mean, that guy, and the kind of crap I know he's taken a lot of crap from people in this Bigfoot world, and that's part of the reason why I don't want anything to do with it. I know what I know. I listen to the shows I listen to, and I don't want any of these yahoos just coming up to my property and doing. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I've never heard wood knocking before. I've never heard that. That's just one thing I've never heard.
It's funny because you've heard like everything else, and even stuff that probably people that have another active property have, would go, oh, well, I've heard the opposite, and never heard what you've heard.
Yeah. It's an ongoing thing. I mean, I kind of wonder if those runes mean something to them because there's been a lot of vocalization since I carved those runes into the trees. I mean, I've heard a couple other shows where they talk about like leaving sticks in like a hieroglyph kind of form or a rune kind of form. There was one thing right down in that area where the camping area below the house where that fire pit is. I took a wood spool down there for, if, sometimes, the kids will come up and their friends will come camp out. Oh, it was probably 2 summers ago. The kids and the grandkids and some of their friends, they wanted to come up and camp there. They're really good about cleaning up, but they left 3 beer bottles, empty beer bottles on the wood spool, like one of those cable spools used for a table. And I arranged them in a certain way. And about 3 days later, I came back and they'd all been turned completely around on that spool. So I turned them back around the way I'd left them, came back down the next day, and they'd all been turned completely around 180 again in this certain little three beer bottle pattern. I thought that was kind of funny, and I don't know if they're trying to communicate or if they're just sort of like letting us know that, hey, yeah, we're here, or, we see you did something, so we're going to do something. I mean, I'm not sure what their motivation is behind all that. If they wanted us, they would have had us a long time ago, The kids, even if they're playing on the play set on the side of the house, somebody's going to be out there with them, And I don't know if my dog would be worth a crap with one of these things, the way he's acted a few times that something's been around and the way he just runs back into the house.
Probably not. Probably not. Poor guys. Yeah, the dogs, even the toughest ones, they seem to go, nope, I'm out. See ya.
Yeah, there was one time I smelled that heavy BO smell. My neighbor, he went on vacation, and at the time he had 4 dogs, had a nice big kennel for him and stuff. And every day after work, I'd run down there and, feed them and, love them and give them water and clean up after them and stuff. And they were always super excited to see me. And there was one day I went down there, they were doing their thing, jumping around. I stepped inside the kennel, closed it up, and all 4 of them just instantly stopped, stared up the hill, put their ears back, and they each ran into the back of their dog houses and just would not come out. And then I started smelling that BO smell. And I'm like, okay, let's get this done. I'm going to get out of here. But every time I think I got a sense of them being around, something will happen. It'll just totally blow that idea out of the water. I've always been really sensitive to like ghosts and spirits and whatnot ever since I was a kid. And when we first moved into that house, I never had a sense that there was any kind of haunting or any kind of residual whatever. And for that first year, I was, because it almost seemed poltergeist-like, but it was always on the exterior of the house. It wasn't anything inside. So that kind of had me questioning myself for that first year we were living there. But
so these symbols that you carved into the trees, what do the symbols mean?
I did 3 for male deities and 1 for Freya. I did 1 for Odin, Tyr, Thor, and then I did 1 for Freya. And they were just just your basic runes for those particular deities. But it just seems like there's been a lot more vocalization, especially around that area. And it was after I'd carved those runes. It was about a month later, that Mother's Day sighting of the big gray guy was just below that camping area, and he was running up towards that general direction. And then when I saw the one that skinny one ducking down into the brush, that was real close to where I saw the big gray one, except this one was hiding, not running away. And that's where my wife got yelled at with that. She called it an Indian yell. That's where some of the whistling has come from, is right down in that area. That's where I caught the orbs on the game cam. I put the game camera on a tree looking at that little camp area, and it's kind of like up the skidder road that comes down into it. And that's where I caught the orbs on the game camera. That's where that fire pit is, where they've left all the different metal. And, here recently, that sighting, that's where the beer bottle thing was happening. I mean, there's sometimes I'll go weeks without going down there just because it's like, man, it's not that I'm afraid of it. It's just like, maybe I just don't want to like see what's down there. It's definitely an interesting place. I've done dowsing in the past, and I've discovered here recently, because of some well issues that we've had, that there's a couple of underground creeks that run right up underneath the house and down towards that. There's 2 of them that seem to come together underneath that camping area. And I don't know if that with like maybe like the earth energies and like ley lines and stuff. I know that water has a lot to do with geomantics and things like that. That little skidder road that ends at that little camping area. Until I got a new mower, my mowers would die right at the head of the camping area where the skidder road comes down, starting up the hill. There's about a 40 foot area of that skidder road where my mowers would just die. They just, every time, I mean, it was like, oh, this is where the mower is going to die, and the mower would die. And that's right about the area where those two underground creeks come together. That's also the same area where all three of my game cameras died within 3 days of each other. I don't know what that was about, but I've tried looking up maps of like telluric lines or ley lines for my area, but I can't seem to find anything online. Maybe I'm not putting in the right search words, but it's a pretty interesting little area.
Have you noticed that certain months are more active every year? Like, is there any pattern that you've noticed?
I think there's more activity during the salmon and steelhead runs, but I mean, we can go months and months with nothing that noticeable happening. But it seems like, usually like the spring and fall. But I mean, we've had activity, every month, throughout the year, over the years. But I haven't really noticed too much of a pattern. I really should have started documenting this stuff a long time ago. I just recently started, putting together an outline. I've done a little writing in my past and, some small publications here and there, but I've been thinking about maybe putting together, I don't know how much this book would grow if I actually did start writing it, but
I mean, you certainly have a lot of activity there, and some of it is unique to your area, including the sounds and, like the Bigfoot that was standing and he did the arms out thing and just dropped to the ground. And what you said about you couldn't even fall that fast if you tried to, I've heard that before.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know what their musculature is like. I mean, the way the one jumped away from the house and down the hill, I mean, there was no knee bend or anything. I stepped out, I could see its head snap over, my head snap towards it, and this thing was gone. I mean, and I could hear it going down through the trees. And I've since dropped some of the trees that were right there because of satellite issues. But yeah, I mean, there was no crouching. It went from a standstill, jumping at least 20 feet to clear the edge of the hill, dropping down. I mean, it blew. I just don't understand. And when we saw the big guy running on all fours up the hill, the way he was moving through that underbrush was just, I mean, if I tried running that at a full speed, I'd fall flat on my face. There's all sorts of undergrowth and vines and, pricklies and stickers and you name it. But
you get tore up. You would just get so tore up doing that. And, the other really cool thing about these things is the fact that they can sound like a freight train or an elephant coming through brush at you if they want to, but they can also be completely silent.
That's what blew me away about that 4th of July night. It had to have already been there. And if it wasn't, it had to have been close by and then was able to, I mean, it was literally within 60 feet of us up the hill. I mean, literally it had to have been within like 60, maybe 75 feet tops. But when that thing took off, it sounded like an out of control Mack truck going through the woods, like it was just 0 to 60 right now, it was no like bump, 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 bump to get going. It was just going. that was like, 4th of July. That's when all the undergrowth is in full leaf and
right.
all the blackberries and the vines and you name it. But I went up there the next day and I everything was just so dense. And my wife, she made it about half as far as I did. She's like, I'm done with this.
It's a lot of work. I mean, you would have to have this big old machete or something. And even then it's a slow go as humans through growth like that.
Yeah. And it's this time of year that I have to maintain my trails, This is when I go clear off all the deadfall.
Right.
And, it's easier this time of year with a machete to whack away the salmon berries and the devil's club. And that devil's club, I mean, you get into a patch of that. I mean, if you trip and fall into that stuff, you're going to be hurting for days, because those thorns have some sort of toxin in them, and you get swelled up. And this is the time of year to clear everything out. And then after everything starts growing, you have to clear it out again. Literally, if people moved out of the Cascades, if we moved off that property and nobody else moved back in, within 2 years, you probably couldn't even find the house. The blackberries alone, those Chinese or Himalayan blackberries that we get, those things I had to have my neighbor bring his bulldozer up to clear out about a half acre of them, because that's about the only way to get rid of them,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nature knows how to take back over. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an ongoing interesting place to live.
Just a couple more questions for you, Tim. Going back to the very beginning when you guys moved in, and you said, the guy was a heavy drinker, and he also would frequently discharge his firearms, if I could speak. The hole in the wall, was this just on the inside, or this is a hole all the way through to the outside?
No, these, like I said, the house is vaulted all the way through, and it's about 12 feet tall down the ridgeline of the house. These were holes through interior walls that were the size of bowling balls. I mean, the 2x4s had been like busted out. Some of the holes in the floor, they were described to me as the size of like a large pizza pan.
Oh my gosh!
And the floor joists had been like broken into the ground. They'd been snapped. And in fact, there's right inside the front door, there's been a rattle, as you walk over. It's been getting worse, but I think that might have been an original, one of the original damages that might have been overlooked. That I'm gonna have to get up under there and put some more 2x6s alongside of it. But yeah, there was originally the house had a full length back deck. This manufactured house was moved onto the property in 93 or 94. And it had a full length back deck, and the landlord told me that it had been constructed with 4x4 posts that had been concreted into the ground about 2 feet deep. And I mean, they would have needed an auger or something, because this is a mountainside. I mean, you dig an inch down and you're hitting rock, But he said that that back deck looked like it had been ripped away from the house. He found these, you take a couple of bags, 3 bags of concrete around a 4x4 post, an 8-foot 4x4 post. I mean, you're talking a few hundred pounds there. And he said these things have been flung all over. He said it looked like they'd been flung all over the backyard, and the back deck was just completely ruined. And now we just have it's like an 8x16, but it would have been, a full-length back deck would have been, 65, 70 feet long. It would have been awesome. It'd be awesome to have a deck like that, but that thing had been completely destroyed. But
yeah, it makes you wonder the relationship, and that's a strong word to use, but the relationship between that man and what we're assuming is Bigfoot that would have been around that area at the time he lived there, of course. So I would assume that he was maybe not the most laid back of fellows to be around.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's all speculation, but I think that first year, I think they were just trying to get a feel for us, I mean, we used to have this work truck that was, it was an F-150, and it had the, it wasn't a full crew cab. It had those suicide doors on either side. We were, the first couple of grandkids we had, we were always hauling them around in there. And a lot of times I leave my stuff unlocked, and I come out to go to work, and the door was slightly ajar, and I was like, oh, this is weird. And then I opened up the door. All the floor mats had been moved around, because when you have, toddlers riding around in a vehicle with you, you're going to get French fries and candy and parts of muffins and stuff all through everywhere. You just unavoidable. But all the floor mats had been moved around. My son-in-law had a bunch of his tools in the back seat. None of the tools had been touched, but that thing looked like it had been picked clean. And that was before, I think that was before we put up it was before we had the cameras for sure. But where it was parked, they probably could have avoided the floodlights just because it was towards the side of one side of the house. Yeah, there was like not one French fry. There was no M&Ms in the back floorboards. It looked like something had gone through and just picked the whole thing clean. And after that, I started locking the truck up. But not one tool came up missing.
Yeah, that is super weird.
Yeah, go figure that one, right?
Yeah. Very, very good, though, as far as you didn't have to bust out the vacuum because something already did that for you.
But yeah, it's like I'd never take a shot at one of these things unless, if there was a charge or something like that. But I really think it's a clan of them. I think it's a family unit. Some of the voices that we've heard off in the woods. For one, we heard that what sounded like a kid for about 3 or 4 years until recently. I can't say that one sounds feminine because I don't know what a female Bigfoot sounds like talking. At least I don't think I do. I've just heard what I've heard all these different random times, and they're relatively, when we hear those voices, they're not that far from the house. You can't see more than 20, 30 feet into the brush. If something was trying to hide from you, they'd be able to do a pretty good job at it,
Now, those pictures, Tim, that you put in Facebook Messenger for me, those are just for me, right? Those are not for public consumption.
Oh, no. If you want to put those out, that's fine. Those are from like 3 summers ago.
Okay.
And I don't know, if you look at that one picture, you can see the left and the right foot and the way the feet are angled and the width of the stance just really kind of got to me. And I'm thinking that's probably a kid, like a teenager. And where that picture was taken is right at the bottom of our gravel road, right before we hit the paved county road. And that's on a big, wide, sweeping bend. And as I was looking at the footprints, I was thinking, this, you can hear cars coming from either way before you see them, because it's, like I said, it's that big, wide, sweeping bend there. And looking at the footprints when we took those pictures, I think that it might have heard a car coming and was trying to figure out where to hide. And that's not very far from that first switchback to head up to our house. And that part of the property, from like the paved county road going up the hill, I really don't go down into that part of the property very much at all. There's about a 30-40 foot cliff from our property that drops down to the county road. There's a game trail that kind of follows the contour elevation line of that hill right there, if you know what I mean. But I hardly ever go down in there. Nope, hardly anybody goes down into that part of the property. There's probably about a 7 or 8 acre area that, it's just, we pretty much just leave alone just because there's no reason to go there. Yeah, those footprints, they're not enormous, but that one close up of the footprint, if I was barefoot, I wouldn't want to be stepping on that rock right in the middle of my foot.
No, in fact, there's a huge bramble in the middle of where the heel is. I'll share all the pictures with everybody. Thank you. So that you guys can see that. Go to intothefrayradio.com, of course, and click on this episode, and you will see how Tim has shared graciously the photos. Yeah, there's a bramble right in the middle of one.
Yeah,
I wouldn't feel too good.
Just the blockiness of the prints,
Yeah. Oh, that dust.
Yeah,
that dust is
I
perfect substrate for those prints, though. It's really cool captures out there.
Yeah, I lost so many pictures, but and then Christmas Eve, just here, less than a month ago, the oldest grandson, he wanted to take our dog out for a walk, and they went down the driveway, and he comes back to the house, and right there at the end of the county road, he goes, "Hey, there's a weird pile of poop there." And then we had a whole bunch of snow, and I was like, oh man, I hope, once the snow melts off. Well, the snow melted off, and I went and looked at that pile of poop, and most bears they're going to be denned up by the first snow. I mean, it's not uncommon for some of the boars not to hibernate all winter. I mean, I have had, bear sightings in snow, after a few snows. Bear poop, like I said, I'm an amateur scatologist, but bears, they spray everywhere. I mean, this here was a concentrated pile, and usually with bears, you can tell what they're eating. Whatever this was, it'd been eating it looked like a lot of meat in its system, but it was a pretty sizable dump. I mean, I was rather impressed with it, but I didn't take a picture of that either. It's probably still there, but it's probably decomposing quite a bit. But and that right there's a gate at the end of the county road, and then it's an old road that used to head up back into the upper part of the watershed from back in the day. But that beyond that gate, even my oldest boy, he and I, we like hunt back up in there. And I'm like, dude, it always blows me away that, because it hasn't been driven on in decades, but it's uncanny how well the trail is that heads up the hill right there. I mean, we're always like, it looks like it's maintained, and it's not me maintaining it. And I don't walk it near enough to keep it that way. That's also where about 4 winters ago, I found towards the top of that road, my granddaughter and I, she wanted to go walking in the snow, and we found this weird stick dome, and it was 3 saplings that had been bent over. And then there was a couple of larger trees that had been angled over to kind of hold them down. And I never did climb down. It was down off the side of the road, and I just never did climb down and actually inspect it. But it since then looks like it's been torn apart. But yeah, I showed that to quite some of my friends and one of my neighbors, and they're like, that's pretty strange. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if a snowfall could actually make all these trees fold over on each other like that. I mean, it seemed like it was abandoned after we saw it, because it never looked like it had been added to until here, like last deer season. It looked like it had been, either fallen apart or taken apart. And we thought that was kind of interesting. But
Tim, before I let you go, what about, I do want to hear as much as I can about your first sighting. And I know that it was at about a 40-yard distance, but the fact that you said it looked like a Neanderthal, of course, we've heard that many a times. Can you describe more details of the face, if there are any to share?
Yeah. It was, he was uphill from me, and I bow hunted for a number of years and never killed anything, so I'm not that good of a bow hunter. But yeah, it was about right around 40 yards. His jaw was just huge, and I mean, big, square, heavy jaw. I mean, he had real thin lips, real wide mouth. The proportion of like the tip of the nose, he had kind of a smushed in hooded nose, I guess that's what everybody calls it, but it was kind of smushed in. But the proportion from the nose to the mouth was more exaggerated than people, than humans. He didn't really have much in the way of wrinkles. I mean, the gray made him look old, but he looked like he was like in his prime. His eyes were pretty deep set. He had a real heavy brow ridge. His ears looked the one ear that I saw, it looked actually small for his head. He definitely had the cone shaped head, that crest. Like I said, a heavy brow line. His forehead kind of sloped back, like it was almost like it blended in with just the rest of the shape of his head. I mean, his head looked proportional to his shoulders. I mean, his head must have been, I got a big head, but his must have been twice what mine is. But yeah, just the color of his eyes. I mean, they said it was like a sparkly amber kind of color. I mean, staring at him, and I know you're not supposed to stare at wildlife in the eyes. I know that. But when I first looked up and seen him, it was like, who's this dude? And then it was like, Neanderthal, what I could see that there was like a wildness in his eyes, but then also like this like intelligence, like this knowing, like I think the only reason I saw him is he intended me to see him. And I think, who knows, maybe he was wondering, well, I've been messing with this guy for a year. Maybe I should let him know who's doing it. I don't know. I don't know what drove him. Because if he had stayed in the brush, like crouched down, I would have had no clue he was ever there. I mean, I don't know if I got too close to where Mama and the kids were sleeping, like if he was on sentry duty, and I've been up to that area several times since. Nowadays, the trees have grown up quite a bit. Yeah, it's a real special area. I mean, and to see him in that boulder field. I mean, and I know that boulder fields have been like this. Oh, geez, all sorts of different paranormal things seem to happen in boulder fields. But yeah, it was. I mean, I still had, like I said, I still had a dream of those eyes. It's like it's something that just got burned into me. Here a few years ago, I was talking to this Yakima Indian, and I always bring it up with the Indians, and they're, if they know that you're serious, they'll open up. I mean, almost down the line. And he told me, yeah, he goes, what I heard is if you stare into their eyes, then you guys are bonded for life. And I'm like, oh, great, thanks, man. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
You're like the thing that's been coming and banging on my house. Great.
But I remember thinking, man, if this thing wanted to, he could jump down here, rip my arms off, and beat me to death with them.
Right.
I mean, I wish I could have seen his whole body, because I would have loved to seen. Everybody talks about the arms, and I've not been able to. I wish I could have seen his arms, and I've heard some of Wes's older shows, like back in before the first year or two. I remember one of the shows they were talking about a big gray guy up in that same area who has a scar on his chest, but I couldn't see enough of his chest to see if there was a scar or not. But it sounds like, and those stories were going back to the 90s.
Yeah, so actually that was going to be my next question, because besides the face, and you called it a Neanderthal, because at first you were like, who's this dude? Like, you thought it was a person. So you didn't see enough of his chest to see if there was a scar there, but how much hair was covering his, his chest and that portion that you did see?
Well, the hair on his head and his shoulders, it looked like he was getting his winter coat. I mean, honestly, that's what it looked like to me. On his chest itself, like in the middle of his chest, like in between the nipple area and stuff, not much hair at all. Yeah, the hair on his shoulders, the way it seriously looked like it'd been combed back. I mean, it kind of reminded me of like, those ermine coats that like the Germanic chieftains used to wear, or like the Norse chieftains, they'd have those ermine coats with the big hairy shoulders, furry shoulders. I mean, there was definitely hair. It wasn't fur on this guy, but I mean, it kind of reminded me of that. Yeah, he was a good looking dude. I mean, like I said, he looked like he was in the prime of his life. But yeah, I've been trying to find that old show where they were talking about that, the big gray guy with the scar on his chest, because he seems like a local celebrity around here. I've heard of, like I said, the fellow that lives down by the river, he was talking about the big gray guy. And he might be the alpha male around here, and maybe he has a bunch of wives. Who knows?
I mean, why not if you could, and then if you get pissed at one, you leave her in this holler and you go to the next holler.
Yeah. And that was one of when we first moved up there, hearing those hollers go back across the canyon, like they were calling out to each other. And I've heard that, the far side of the canyon from us, it is steep and deep over there. I mean, that is some rugged country. Just like last summer, I was hearing those hollers again. They're moving through that stuff at an enormous speed. I mean, I don't even think the pickup trucks that drive the couple logging roads that are up there when the gates are open, they don't even travel as fast as what these things sound like they're moving through the woods. And it's usually right before sunset. You'll start to hear one from one direction, and then you'll hear another from another direction, and it's like their wake up call or their morning alarm or something. They're getting up for the evening, and they're just locating each other or something. That's what it seems like to me. And then you hear them getting closer and closer, and within 10, 15 minutes, it sounds like they're right on top of each other, you know? Yeah, there was one time, here's a kind of a funny story with like rock clacking. We were out, this is after we knew that there was, you know, critters hanging around. My nephew came up and to stay with us, and, you know, we got the speakers out and we put on some metal, and we drank some beers and drank some whiskey and had a big fire, and then, you know, decided to turn in for the night. Well, the next morning we're out on the back deck and having our morning coffee, and we were hearing these rocks clacking like a drum beat, you know, kind of like the start of a Motorhead song or something, like I'm like, hey Joe, you hear that? He goes, yeah. He goes, that sounds like rocks. He goes, it does sound like rocks. I'm like, what do you think that could be? And he's like, I don't know, squirrels. I'm like, dude, when was the last time you heard of squirrels picking up two rocks and banging them together, especially that fast and that loud? And I think that they were kind of mimicking, like, you know, a heavy metal drum beat. And I called the middle boy out. I'm like, hey, the wife came out. And like, it went on for probably a good 10 minutes down below the house down there. And I was like, yeah, I ain't gonna go down there. You could sure hear like the two rocks just going for it, you know. I mean, it sounded like the start of a Motorhead song. And we'd been playing Motorhead the night before, so
they have the rhythm just like we do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've never heard the sticks on trees, but I've heard the rocks a few times. But I don't know. It gives rock and roll a whole different meaning, I guess.
Well, in your area, it does. No, it'd be cool to. My plan is to go out to Mesquite, Nevada, and go out to one of the fireworks places that sells like I'm talking big ass fireworks, like the illegal ones that you can't bring back. You're not supposed to bring back to Vegas, but people do anyway. And I want to get out to your house and just start setting off fireworks and see what happens, you know?
I swear to God, I think they like them. I really think that they get off on fireworks. Like my wife thought when that thing huffed at us those 5 times. I mean, at first I was like, oh, geez, this thing's trying to run us off, but then it takes off. But, you know, I have a friend who has a Down syndrome kid, and, you know, he's about 17 now. And I remember one time, you know, we were lighting off fireworks. I think it was it was New Year's Eve several years ago. And just the joy, he was so happy and clapping and, you know, kind of like shaking. And I kind of think it was, I think that's how maybe this thing was expressing its, you know, excitement over the fireworks, you know? I mean, I'm not trying to talk bad or anything about Down syndrome, but I mean, it's a horrible thing. But I think maybe it was just got so excited about being so close to the fire, because this thing was literally, like I said, maybe 60, 70 feet up the hill from us. And
right.
It's 10:30 at night. It's dark.
But, well, that's how it felt like expressing itself. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, because we'd already lit off like, I don't know, 7 or 8 pair already. And some of these were like, you know, 3-shot, you know, per mortar, you know, you get,
right,
you know, 3 reports out of it. So you're getting like 6 reports all at once, you know. I don't know. I mean, they've definitely come around, you know, after shooting off fireworks. And, you know, we're doing the illegal kind, you know, the big old mortars and, you know, well, in our county, they're not illegal, but, you know, you just have to, you don't want to burn the forest down for sure. But yeah, it's an interesting thing about that. In fact, there's a up above that boulder field, there's a nice big flat area all covered in moss and stuff. I don't know if I'd want to camp out there by myself at night, but I bet you if you started lighting off fireworks from there, because it's probably another 400 feet in elevation above where the house is at, you could it'd probably be a kind of like setting up some beacons for them, you know. I've always thought about, you know, if I could get a few people together that, because I don't want to camp out there by myself, but if we get 3 or 4 people and, you know, if it's wet enough, just blow off some fireworks and just like hang out up in that area for the night, because it's kind of a unique area because there's some real heavy forested areas on either side of this power line cut, and like I said, it's critter central. I mean, I've seen all sorts of different animals up in there, but like I said, I don't want a bunch of yahoos. If it's people, it's going to be people that I know or people that I trust. I've heard too many horror stories about the BFRO showing up and then all hell breaks loose. But
oh yeah, that's if anybody gets wind of where it is. That's why it's got to be keep it secret, keep it safe. Like Gandalf says. So okay, last question, Tim. Would you want to see one again, except very, very, very close?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, I've never had a bad encounter other than the rock, and I don't even know where that rock came from. But I don't know about how close, though. I mean, I think I'd like to think I have enough experience and enough self-control to where I could just, let's say one stepped out, 30 feet from me. I just put both of my hands up because that's kind of a universal sign, not like up above my head or anything, but I just show them my hands. I think, I mean, I'd try to stand my ground. And if most people, when they get frightened by something, they freeze anyway. I don't know. I'd like to think I've played scenarios like that over and over in my head. And ultimately, I don't know I'm not going to turn around and run because you just don't run from wildlife. And I'm not saying that they are wildlife, but you just don't run from wildlife. I don't know. I'd really like to, I don't know. Geez, that's hard. I mean, I kind of expect to see them again, like the one that I surprised at the front door. I don't know if that was a male or a female. I'm kind of thinking it was maybe a female because it just seemed blockier. But I can't be for sure. It happened so fast. The big gray guy, though, I mean, he was definitely intimidating. He definitely, I don't know. I almost expect to see him again. There was a number of years there where I wished that I'd never, ever seen that big guy, and this and that. But then I started thinking, I don't know how my life would be different if you could go back and change things. You can't go back and say, oh, I wish I could change this, because you don't know who you'd be now. I'm trying not to get too deep into that, but it is what it is. It happened. I know that they exist. I don't go around trying to preach to people or anything. I want people to be skeptical. Please do. I was skeptical until all this stuff happened to me. I'm not trying to force people to believe in it. It's funny. I mean, I'm not afraid to tell the stories. The first few months, I wouldn't tell anybody. It took me 3 weeks just to tell my wife about it. I've always been kind of a madman in my younger years. I was a wild man. I've had friends tell me that, well, if anybody was going to have a sighting of Bigfoot, it'd be you.
They're like, of course it's Tim that has the sighting.
But it's funny because once I opened up about it, a lot of guys I've known for many years and women too, that they were like, oh yeah, when I was 10, I was on my grandpa's property and there was this big hairy thing in the trail and it was eating a pheasant and it turned around and ran off and left the pheasant. And this woman I know, she's like, oh yeah, I was hunting with my husband and I saw these two sets of tracks going down to the creek. And I looked down and I got down to the creek and there they were just crossing the creek and the mom turned back. She was holding hands with her kid and they just went off up the hill. And, once I opened up about it, I started hearing, I was surprised by some of the stuff these people I'd known for years were sitting on. My buddy Hillbilly, he got screamed at. It was about 3 years ago. I got invited up to his elk camp and I got up there and just a couple weeks before he was out deer hunting up in near Mount St. Helens. And he said he got to the point where he wanted to hunt. It was, where two game trails came together right before a creek and perfect little choke point. So he sat down against a tree. He said something screamed at him. And I was like, well, what did you do? And he goes, I took the safety off and I sat there shaking for about 8 hours.
Oh God, that's terrible.
He goes, I believe you now, Tim. I believe you.
He just stayed there the whole time. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. He said he sat there for hours and did not move. I was like, it probably blew your hunt. He goes, I didn't see one deer all day.
Oh yeah. Exactly. See, and he probably knew that too, but still was just too petrified to move. He's like, there's no reason for me to be sitting here for the initial reason I came out here for, but I ain't going anywhere.
Well, we got to talking about the screams, and I've heard similar screams like that, and I've heard a lot of people say that they think they might have two sets of vocal cords, because you'll get that rumble, but you also get the screech at the same time. It's I've heard numerous people try to describe it, but it makes sense. I mean, why couldn't like a cousin of ours be built differently and have two sets of vocal cords? I mean,
Absolutely.
Why not? I mean, what the hell else is there on this planet that they ain't telling us about?
Well, I really hope that you keep in touch with me, because, I mean, Washington State obviously has a special place in my heart because I lived there, and I just love that area like no other. And I am very jealous that you get to drive home to an active Bigfoot area tonight. So please keep in touch with me, because I want to know what's going on there.
Hey, maybe we ought to set up a camp out with Wes and you, and come up in the summertime, and I don't know, if it's wet enough, blow off some fireworks, see what happens.
I'll do a rain dance to make sure it is wet enough, because it sounds like the fireworks is a no-brainer out there. But, well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me.
Hey, thanks for letting me vent on you.
Absolutely. No, the venting is great. I love the venting. That's what I live for, is the venting. So, no, thank you so much. And remember, everybody, to head to the website and click on the episode, which I've already decided. The name is Whistle Punks of Skamania County will be the name of the episode, and then you can see the pictures that Tim has agreed to share. So thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. They will say reincarnation means this, that if you sitting here now are really convinced that you're the same person who walked in the door half an hour ago, you're being reincarnated. If you are liberated, you will understand that you're not. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. There is only the present. That's the only real you that there is. The Zen master Dogen put it in this way. He said, the spring does not become the summer. First there is summer, and then there is spring. When you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.